Supreme achievement. We have reaction to Judge Brett Kavanaugh, a lifelong Catholic, reaching the nation's highest court after a bruising confirmation battle. Defending the Pope. What a Vatican official is saying about allegations the Holy Father covered up clergy sexual abuse. On trial. New developments in the case of a Catholic woman in Pakistan facing the death penalty. And dance off in the Vatican. The Holy Father is treated to an upbeat performance during the Synod on Youth. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, October 8th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Brett Kavanaugh is officially a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. His confirmation caps a highly partisan fight that dominated the national conversation for weeks. House Democrats are pledging further investigation if they win the majority in November.
Mr. Grassley.
In a high-stakes Saturday vote, the Senate confirming Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court.
On this vote, the ayes are 50, the nays are 48.
The voting interrupted at times by multiple protesters. Hours later, Kavanaugh was sworn in as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell touted a victory in a fiery confirmation battle fueled by allegations of sexual assault from Christine Blasey Ford, accusations Kavanaugh denies.
It's a good day for America and an important day for the Senate.
After a bruising battle, some lawmakers shared concerns about the message the confirmation sends to sexual assault victims.
This body has had a test, and we are failing that test.
Hundreds of demonstrators for and against Kavanaugh made their voices heard in the nation's capital. One of the largest crowds gathered in front of the steps of the Supreme Court as Kavanaugh was sworn in. Saturday's vote on Kavanaugh was the closest vote to confirm a justice since 1881. All Democratic senators voted against Kavanaugh except for one, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. President Trump is celebrating the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh, but he isn't letting Democrats off the hook for what he calls the most disgraceful performance he's ever seen. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump believes Brett Kavanaugh was caught in a hoax created by Democrats. He says allegations of sexual misconduct against Kavanaugh were made up. And now the president thinks it will cause a swell of Republican voters to push back in November's midterm elections.
I think you're going to see a lot of things happen on November 6th that would not have happened before. The American public has seen this charade, has seen this dishonesty by the Democrats.
President Trump, coming off the weekend confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh, has fresh resentment toward Democrats.
The way they really tortured him and his family, I thought it was a disgrace. I thought it was one of the most disgraceful performances I've ever seen.
As Democrats fell a few votes short of toppling Kavanaugh's nomination on Saturday, President Trump watched the drama unfold from Air Force One on his way to a rally in Kansas. He then signed a commission appointing his second Supreme Court nominee to the High Court, cementing a victory for conservatives. But Ohio Governor John Kasich, a Republican, blasted both political parties for the handling of Kavanaugh's nomination.
It's both sides, a pox on both houses for the way this was conducted, and people in the country are appalled. That's because it's like, I got to win and you got to lose.
Still, as the midterm elections inch closer, the president is predicting more wins for his party, saying he believes voters will flip at the ballot box.
I think a lot of Democrats are going to be voting Republican on November 6th.
We may not have heard the end of the Kavanaugh controversy. Some Democrats in the House of Representatives have said they would investigate Kavanaugh if their party gains control after the midterm elections. Kavanaugh, for his part, is following through with his promise to hire an all-female team of clerks. Wyatt?
Mark, the court now has a conservative majority. Are there any upcoming cases that pro-lifers should be aware of?
Well, a potential early test involves efforts in Kansas and Louisiana to strip public money from Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest abortion provider. The Supreme Court could decide to take up or reject those cases as early as tomorrow. Tonight, I'll provide a live Facebook report on Kavanaugh's ceremonial swearing in here at the White House.
coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern. Wyatt.
Okay, we'll be watching that. White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. And joining me now for more analysis is Kevin Daley, Supreme Court reporter for the Daily Caller. Kevin, welcome back to the program.
Good to be with you.
Tomorrow, Justice Kavanaugh will take the bench for his first oral arguments. Do you think now Justice Kavanaugh will really be able to put behind him all of this tumultuous process?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that there's been a lot of discussion about Justice Kavanaugh's temperament in the aftermath of his testimony before the Senate on September 27th. He's a person who had a reputation for dignity, for solemnity, for stateliness when he was on the court on the D.C. Circuit, and I don't think he will have a lot of trouble recovering that reputation once his work begins in earnest as a Supreme Court justice.
Many conservatives say this whole fight hinges on the abortion issue, Roe v. Wade. Obviously, Kavanaugh has received a lot of support from pro-lifers, and therefore there are a lot of people who are in favor of abortion who have been against him throughout this entire process. In your view, what role did the issue of abortion, or how critical was the issue of abortion?
Well, I think abortion politics drive much of our judicial confirmation politics. But what was strange about this was that Judge Kavanaugh is not a person who's really distinguished himself on the abortion issue. He has not had occasion to write about it very much on the D.C. Circuit. In fact, he was involved in just one abortion case in his 12 years as a D.C. Circuit judge. So there was an extent to which all of the attention paid to the abortion issue was a bit unwarranted in light of his record.
What influence do you think Justice Kavanaugh will have long-term on the court and its rulings?
I think that remains to be seen. We know that Judge Kavanaugh is a deeply conservative jurist, but we don't know exactly what sort of jurist he is. We don't know if he is the cautious incrementalist in the vein of Chief Justice John Roberts, we don't know if he's the sweeping, bold dogmatist like Justice Thomas. Much will depend on the answer to that question, where he falls on that spectrum. I think the other immediate effect of his confirmation is the empowerment of Chief Justice John Roberts. Chief Justice Roberts is now the median vote or the swing vote on the Supreme Court, and he also, as Chief Justice, holds the assignment power, the power to assign opinions to his colleagues. So he holds the fifth vote on a range of decisive issues, and he will dictate exactly how far the court is going to move in certain directions. So he is certainly the most powerful Chief Justice now in living memory.
Well, speaking of moving in different directions and how it's sort of perceived, Saturday's vote, of course, was the closest vote, as we mentioned, to confirm a justice since 1881. Do you think the narrow margin of victory is going to affect the people's perception of the court?
Quite possibly. I think I'd say a few things. First, Justice Kavanaugh is one member of a 9-member institution, and it's not quite clear to me how exactly the public's perception of one justice would dilute its perception of the other 8. He is a member of an institution and needs to be remembered as just one component of the broader court. The second thing I would say is, the court, as has often been said, is kind of immune from the weather of the day, but is not immune from the climate of the era. So though I think in the short and medium term, conservatives have won a significant victory in capturing the court, ideological capture of the court tends not to last very long. The Warren court gave way to the Rehnquist court would be an example of modern history. The sweeping, bold liberal court gives way to a more cautious conservative court. And I think that though there's a lot of effusiveness and enthusiasm on the right now because of the Kavanaugh confirmation, it's important to remember that the court cannot permanently be a bulwark against popular majorities.
It's fascinating stuff, and so interesting to hear about it from your perspective. Kevin Daley, Supreme Court reporter for the Daily Caller, thanks so much for your analysis.
My pleasure.
As bishops from around the world gather in Rome, the Vatican is defending the Pope against claims he covered up the sexual misconduct of a prominent American cardinal. The head of the Vatican's bishop's office says there is no evidence the Holy Father canceled any sanctions against former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. The response comes 6 weeks after Archbishop Carlo Vigano published allegations Pope Francis knew about McCarrick's sexual misconduct. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for the National Catholic Register, joins us. Edward, in his letter, Cardinal Mark Willett denounces claims made by Archbishop Vigano, the former Vatican ambassador. Walk us through his letter.
Okay, right. Well, Cardinal Willett calls Vigano's claims a blasphemous political setup, but he does confirm for the first time that McCarrick was subject to some form of disciplinary measures. Willett says the, quote, exhortation to live a discreet life of prayer stopped short of binding canonical sanctions because the rumours about McCarrick's misconduct lacked proof. Now, the rebuke marks the first Vatican direct response to Vigano's 11-page letter accusing Pope Francis and 24 church officials of covering up for McCarrick since the year 2000. McCarrick is accused of sexually abusing seminarians and at least one minor. Vigano, who was the Vatican's ambassador in Washington, D.C. from 2011 to 2016, demanded Pope Francis to resign for his role in the scandal, or what he says is a cover-up.
And the cardinal here uses very strong language in this open letter about Archbishop Vigano.
That's right, Wyatt. Cardinal Ouellet says Archbishop Vigano's allegations were an unjust and unjustified attack on Pope Francis. He says it profoundly wounded the communion of the Church, and he demands that Archbishop Vigano come out of hiding and repent for what he says is a false accusation against Pope Francis. But he also makes some strong judgments himself, Cardinal Ouellet, questioning how Vigano can continue to celebrate Mass and pray the Rosary given his attack on Christ's Vicar on earth. Now, I should also say my sources contest some of what he says, particularly that it was a political plot. People contest that very strongly. Also very interesting is that Ouellet does acknowledge that Theodore McCarrick under Benedict XVI was strongly urged not to travel or appear in public and to live a discreet life of prayer. But he says there are no documents about any canonical sanctions imposed by Pope Benedict XVI. He says it's false to suggest Pope Francis had annulled any such measures, but doesn't really deal with the issue that he influenced the appointment of some bishops.
Pope Francis has authorized a thorough study of the accusations against McCarrick. Tell us more about that investigation.
Right. Well, the Vatican says it'll be looking at how McCarrick, who was a prominent American cardinal, advanced through the church ranks despite allegations that he was sexually involved with seminarians and young priests. This is the first response to the explosive allegations of cover-up that is roiling the papacy. The Vatican says it's aware such an investigation may produce evidence that mistakes were made when evaluated with today's standards. But it said Francis would follow the path of truth wherever it may lead. Similar to Cardinal Ouellet's letter, though, the statement did not address specific allegations that Francis himself knew of McCarrick's sexual misconduct in 2013. And that's obviously the most central subject. Now, this is a topic dominating the Synod right now. In fact, today, the Vatican's leading expert on sexual abuse says that Pope Francis' summit in February, in which church leaders will discuss preventing abuse, that it should also address holding bishops accountable. That's obviously going to be significant. Even though it's not discussed here, it will be discussed there, he said.
So many important issues being discussed at the Synod right now, not just the McCarrick investigation, but also, obviously, the response to Archbishop Vigano. We'll continue to follow this. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Coming up later in the show, we'll have analysis on the Vatican's response from Ed Condon of Catholic News Agency. Pope Francis met this morning with the leaders of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Included were Cardinal Daniel DiNardo of Galveston, Houston, Archbishop Jose Gomez of Los Angeles, and two other members of the Bishops' Conference. Neither the bishops nor the Vatican has released any details on their conversations. Pressure is mounting on the church in Poland after a private foundation published a map showing where priests have been accused of child sex abuse. The country's bishops say they expect to release a report on abuse next month. Poland is predominantly Catholic. A Billboard Top 100 artist representing New Zealand and Samoa is among the young people addressing the Vatican Synod. 31-year-old Young Joe says he very much likes what he's hearing at the meeting so far. He says the church can better reach today's youth by being more savvy with technology. The recording artist also says it's a privilege to be at the Holy See. There is plenty more on our newscast tonight. Coming up, what the Secretary of State is saying after his latest trip to North Korea. Plus, leaders of the Mormon Church are calling for a little less time in church. We'll tell you why.
Tu sei aperta alle sorprese di Dio.
At Mass today, Pope Francis asked the faithful to be open to the surprises that God gives us. He also reminds us to draw close to the needy. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he and Kim Jong-un are making significant progress on a deal that would rid North Korea of its nuclear weapons. Pompeo and Kim met in Pyongyang on Sunday. The secretary also met with officials in China today on the final stop of his Asian tour. They're asking the U.S. to stop criticizing Beijing. Relations between the countries have been strained by tariffs. Pakistan's Supreme Court postpones its ruling on the final appeal of a Catholic woman on death row. Asia Bibi was sentenced to death in 2010 after a mob accused her of blasphemy against Islam. The three-judge panel did not say when it would announce its decision. Bibi's lawyer says he is 100% sure she will be acquitted. Her case has generated international outrage. At least 12 people are dead following an earthquake over the weekend in Haiti. The quake destroyed houses and a strong aftershock caused panic. Some Haitians are sleeping outside over fears their houses will collapse. An earthquake in 2010 damaged much of the capital and killed an estimated 300,000 people. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, the faithful search for answers after a devastating earthquake and tsunami. Christians have flocked to the church yesterday in the city of Palu. Protestants and Catholics make up about 10% of the population there. The death toll has climbed to nearly 1,700 people, and more than 250 are still missing. An official vote to define marriage in Romania as a union between a man and a woman is voided. More than 90% supported the referendum, but it fell short of the roughly one-third participation needed for it to count legally. Marriage in the Orthodox country currently is defined as between, quote, spouses. Orthodox leaders called the vote a partial success and asked the faithful to continue their work defending the family. Mormons will start spending less time at church on Sundays. Members will now attend 2 hours of worship instead of 3. The announcement comes as leaders try to make the church more manageable. The change will take effect in January. There's a lot more to come on EWTN News Nightly. Up next, why a favorite Catholic prayer took center stage in the nation's capital. Plus, at the Synod on Youth, some participants are taking steps in the right direction. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. A top cardinal has issued a scathing rebuke of a former Vatican ambassador who is asking for Pope Francis to step down. In a letter, Cardinal Mark Willett said claims by Archbishop Carlo Vigano are a blasphemous hit job. In August, Vigano alleged Pope Francis knew of the sexual misconduct by former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. McCarrick is accused of abusing seminarians, priests, and at least one minor. He's been ordered to live a life of prayer and penance and is living in a Kansas friary. Joining me now is Edward Condon, the Washington, D.C. editor for the Catholic News Agency. Ed, welcome back to the program.
Nice to be here.
Do you think Cardinal Willett's letter will finally put to rest some of these claims by Carlos Vigano?
No, I think quite the opposite. There's a lot in this letter from Cardinal Willett that's only going to increase speculation and increase calls for clarity from the Vatican on exactly what happened regarding Cardinal McCarrick, now Archbishop McCarrick, and when.
The letter scolds Archbishop Vigano. It calls him out of hiding, actually. It tells him to repent. But this letter also seems to confirm some of the allegations.
That's right. I mean, the letter from Cardinal Willett to Archbishop Vigano, on the one hand, is very publicly and topically a rebuke to Archbishop Vigano, but on the other hand, it's also confirming a lot of the details that were in Vigano's original narrative, amongst them that some action was taken, at least as early as 2007, against then Cardinal McCarrick while he was living in retirement. Now, Cardinal Willett's letter disputes that these were formally canonical sanctions or punishments or penalties, but it does appear that some kind of restriction was in fact put on him in that time.
Yeah, it does give us some clues. So, mentions McCarrick. Does the letter shed any light on Cardinal Donald Worrell, who's currently of Washington, who's been under scrutiny, of course, who came after McCarrick?
No, there's no direct reference to Cardinal Worrell in either Archbishop Vigano's second letter or Cardinal Willett's response. But this letter from Cardinal Willett does place more pressure on Cardinal Worrell. He'd previously in the summer, when the allegations against McCarrick first surfaced, said that he was very shocked by this, that he never had any suspicion or inkling that there was something wrong with McCarrick in his background or past or in his time in retirement. Now that we know that Rome was aware of the allegations against McCarrick at least as early as 2007 and taking steps to try and curtail his life in retirement, it becomes increasingly difficult for Cardinal Worrell to sustain this sort of blanket denial that he's made.
So many more questions. What did he know? How much did they communicate with him?
Absolutely.
The Pope is convening a meeting in February of all the heads of the world's bishop conferences. What can we expect from that meeting?
Well, in a sense, we have to expect the unexpected. There has never been a meeting of all the presidents of the world's bishops' conferences before, so we're in new terrain. In terms of what we're going to see that comes out of that substantively addressing the crisis of sexual abuse in the church globally, not just in the United States, but in South America and emerging in other European countries as well, It's too soon to tell, but I think what a lot of people will be hoping for is a sustained, systematic approach. Pope Francis has been very personally involved in responding to recent crises, for example, in Chile, taking a lot of personal responsibility and a lead on that sort of thing. But his style of becoming personally involved sometimes makes him reactive rather than proactive, and also leads it to look like he's reinventing the wheel every time. I think what people are going to look for in the February meeting is for a systemic approach that's going to be given the authority and the time to breathe and prove itself.
You guys with Catholic News Agency are carefully following all of this and writing all of the details as well. Ed Condon, D.C. editor for Catholic News Agency, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hundreds of Catholics come together in the nation's capital to pray. Attendees marched from Capitol Hill to the National Mall, where they prayed all four mysteries of the Rosary. The National Rosary Rally marks the end of the 54-day novena for our nation. One man says the Blessed Virgin can cure the division in the United States.
I'm here to honor her and honor our country by praying these rosaries for our freedoms, and to thank her for everything she's done in my life. And I really am very thankful for the rosary. Is the most powerful prayer we can pray as a country to help turn everybody around and to love God more.
Michael Hoffman says he traveled all the way from Oregon to take part. And finally tonight, from marching in Washington to dancing at the Vatican, where a group of young people held center stage this weekend. The dancers performed in front of the bishops and Pope Francis, who are taking part in the synod. The meeting focused on youth has drawn church leaders from all around the globe, and it goes, of course, until the end of the month. And we're thankful, by the way, for all of our viewers' prayers for our EWTN team members who have been traveling to Rome this month to cover the Synod. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Thank you for watching. Good night, and God bless.